today we are freezing a bunch of things from the garden. The time of year when you get a lot of stuff in your share, and sometimes people feel overwhelmed and don't know what to do. And I always say, just freeze it and have it for later. You can, if you plan, you can almost have vegetables for the whole 52 weeks if you think about things that you can freeze or dry or can in each batch, and just get those set aside. And I also encourage people who really want to eat well and eat in season to buy a freezer to help facilitate that. So that's a little bit of an investment, but down the line, you don't have to pay for any vegetables, and you can't find anything at this high quality on the market generally in the wintertime anyway. So it's a real win-win. So right now we're going to freeze a few things, but we're starting with kale right now. And Christy and I have been discussing whether or not to use the stalks, and they are good for you, the stems, and feel free to chop them up and freeze them too. But I just don't don't enjoy the flavor that much, and nor do my eaters. So we just do this process first of just stripping the kale off the stems. Once we have the kale stripped, then we chop it up into bite-sized pieces, so that once it's taken out of the bag, when we're done, when we're having it for in the wintertime sometime, it'll just be nice and bite-sized. All we have to do is warm it up and get it nice and hot again, and we're ready to go. So that's what Christy is demonstrating so well. She's a fine chef, cuts everything very neatly. All right, here we are with our wood cook stove. We got its former version 40 years ago, and just 2 years ago we replaced this wonderful, I forget the name of it. Isn't that awful? It's a wood Stanley from Ireland, but I guess it's not out of stock now. It has our water on it in the back. We have water pipes up here, gravity-fed hot water system. So we have our water coming to a boil, and the idea with freezing vegetables is you want them to be cooked very quickly, just enough to stop the enzyme action in the plants. If you just were to put this directly in the freezer, they would continue to break down in a way that would cause them to taste like cardboard. So that's why we do this process of blanching, it's called, just to cook them a little bit. And what we want to do, I'm going to put the lid on so it does a better job, but we have a certain color now, the color of the initial plant, and then we want to bring it to a boil, back to a boil, and in a minute we will stir it a little bit perhaps, and then in a minute we'll take it out. It'll turn a brighter green, and we will quickly cool it off in cold water and then put it in the bag for freezing. So a very simple process. Here's our kale. Already has turned a slight different color green. You can see it's brightening up a little bit in its color. We don't really have a boil yet, so we're going to wait for that boil to happen. And then I'm going to set my timer for 1 minute, which I think is about ideal. Nothing is more unsatisfactory than when you overcook your vegetables when you're preparing them for the freezer, because they just don't taste very good. That's very sad after you put all that effort into them. So I'm going to wait for that boil, and then I'll set my timer for 1 minute. So there. So I'm going to set this timer and leave that lid on so it can really do its job. In the meanwhile, I'm going to go over and get my colander set up in the sink. And when that's done, we'll pour it off into the sink and run cold water on it as fast as possible. I purchased some of these bags from Uline last year, Uline. They're about 6 mil, and they're really nice and sturdy. What I find generally when I use a Ziploc or some other kind of bag in the freezer, that they'll break when you move them around much. So these are second year on these. We can probably use these for another 5, 6, 7 years actually. So it was a worthwhile investment, I felt, for the process of really being able to catalog our tons and tons of food that we have and keep it from breaking in the freezer. Okay, there goes the timer. So I'm going to take this one over here. I'm going to put this guy on the hot spot to cook a little faster on the squash. And pour this off. Nice, really beautiful green color still. See that? And then run cold water on it. I'm going to get some of this water out of here. Some of this extra kale, sorry, that made it into the pot. And then just move it around with my hands to get it cold as fast as possible. It's got a nice leathery feel to it. When you raise your vegetables with a lot of minerals, which we do, either through our carbon sequestering methods or we use some nice blended organic fertilizer, and then we use a lot of foliar sprays, we end up with really super nutritious vegetables that have a lot of weight to them. Minerals are heavy. So this doesn't take too long here. And I'm going to call that done. And the next thing we're going to do is just this into a bag. While I'm doing that, I'll fill my pot for my next job. And then I put them in these bags. Another nice thing about these heavy-duty bags is that I can, if I want to have less than a bag's worth of vegetables in a meal, I can kind of drop them on the floor. We have a nice slate floor, and they'll kind of crack apart in the bag, and I can just take out little sections of kale. So this was about maybe 3 bunches of kale that are in this batch. So we have large numbers of people at our table at all times, and so I tend to like to freeze things in large quantities. But you know, things always end up with less volume than you perhaps hoped at first when you do freeze things. Just open this up a little bit more here and move this around and try to get all the air out. And then I'll zipper that up, and we are set to put this in the freezer. So we'll take that down and get that in the freezer right away, and we're done. And there you have kale for next winter.